to all the participants from Sri Lanka, and good afternoon for our panelists and officials from the Sri Lanka Consulate General in Sydney, Australia. We are now ready to start this very important meeting, the webinar on the Australian market, namely market enhancement for Sri Lankan products and services in Australia. As you all know, now these days we can't have any physical events to promote Sri Lanka's exports in overseas markets. So we are using these web-based tools to promote Sri Lanka's exports. This is one of such events jointly organized by Sri Lanka Export Development Board and Sri Lanka Consulate General in Sydney, Australia. Today we have very important sessions to cover. There will be, after the opening session, there will be technical session. We have lined up 4 presentations from the resource contribution from Australian side. They will do some PowerPoint presentations as well. And after, at the end of the session, there will be Q&A session. For any participant can send in your questions using the Q&A option available in this Zoom app. So according to the questions, I will forward those to our resource persons today. And you can get whatever the clarifications from them. And I kindly request everyone to send your questions and make use of this very important webinar organized jointly by EDB and Sri Lanka Consulate General in Sydney. So that is the format of the session. To inaugurate the session formally, I now would like to invite Mr. Lakshman Hunugalla, Consul General of Sri Lanka in Sydney. Mr. Lakshman Hunugalla assumed duties as Consul General of Sri Lanka in Sydney from 24th August 2020. He has previously served as Deputy High Commissioner in the Sri Lanka High Commission in Canberra in 2014. He had also served as the Director General of Media Centre for National Security from 2006 and 2009. So with that introduction, I give floor to Mr. Hunugalla, Consul General of Sri Lanka in Sydney, to open this webinar. Over to you, Mr. Hunugalla.
Thank you, Anoma. Thank you very much for the introduction. Good evening for the participants and the panel from Australia, and good morning to all Sri Lankan panel and also to the participants who are participating. I'm very thankful to the EDB and especially for Anoma for organizing this webinar with the Export Development Board and also with the consultation of our Consul General Office in Sydney. And also, I must say thank you before we go on to all the panel members who have joined us today willingly. When we invited, they willingly join us. So thank you very much for your contribution at a time like this. As you told, I assumed duties about 1.5 months back, and my prime duty when I was appointed was to promote the investment promotion in Australia for Sri Lanka and also to promote tourism in Australia. But unfortunately, as you know, globally we all face the COVID-19 crisis, and although Sri Lanka has done a yeoman service to control that, we all are facing problems to meet people, and there are no one-to-one meetings, and people gatherings are very limited. So in Australia also those regulations are very strict, and we are finding difficult to do promotions like good old days, as everybody knows. But Australia has been or is a very good or sincere partner, business partner to us. And Australia and Sri Lanka are having a lot of businesses and a lot of connections among the two countries. But we are now with the new government policies and with the president's new vision, we are trying to promote business much more with investors coming from Australia to Sri Lanka with various benefits to get more investors. However, in Australia, with all these regulations and strict uh, discipline, with the foreign help of Foreign Ministry, then Export Development Board, and the Ministry of Commerce or Department of Commerce, our commercial section, we as a consult office, we are trying to promote businesses. And also whatever we promote for Sri Lanka is for the benefit of the people of Sri Lanka. In fact, Mr. Raheem and I, today in the morning, we met a Honorable Minister for Skills Development and Education to promote Sri Lanka. Although, as I told you, they are very difficult to get a one-to-one meeting. So with this, the government policies are attracting for foreign investments today. I think the Sri Lanka government has given a lot of opportunities for foreigners to come and invest in Sri Lanka and attracting medium and large investors to come into the country. So I think EDB, Export Development Board, they have, during last 2 or 3 decades, they have done a great service. But now with this problems facing, I think we all will have to get together and do a bigger service to get these tourists or investors back to the country. So let's try and hope. My assumption of work and during my time, my prime target is to get investors through EDB. And I have already spoken to your energetic chairman. I had a long discussion. In fact, I think Anoma was also there. So you all have good plans, and that we will definitely go according to that with the help of the Board of Investment and the Export Development Board. We'll try our best. So I wish all the best for this webinar, and thank you again. Thank you for Anoma for organizing this, and Export Development Board. I thank the entire organization from chairman to everybody. And on my side, I thank Mr. Raheem taking the initiative to organize this. So let's do a good webinar now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hulugalla, our Consul General of Sri Lanka in Sydney, for setting the stage for this very important webinar. So now we can go for the technical session. First presentation or the speech is to be made by Mr. Abdul Raheem, Consul Commercial, Consulate General of Sri Lanka in Sydney. The topic he is covering is ongoing bilateral trade and market opportunities for Sri Lankan products in Australia and the market condition during and post COVID-19. So I invite Mr. Abdul Raheem to do his presentation. Over to you, Mr. Raheem. Mr. Raheem, give me a minute to formally introduce you as well. So Mr. Raheem is a career commercial service officer from the Department of Commerce of Sri Lanka. He has previously served as the Consul General of Sri Lanka in Dubai, UAE, and also Mumbai, India. His other diplomatic postings in the Sri Lanka missions overseas include Karachi, Pakistan, Moscow, Russia, and Frankfurt, Germany. With that brief introduction, I request Mr. Raheem to take the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Anoma. Thank you very much for introductions, and I also would like to thank EDB for jointly hosting this webinar, and especially thanks to you and Ms. Apsara, the Assistant Director, who have worked together in organizing this webinar. Good afternoon to all the participants in Australia and all the panel members, and good morning to all the Sri Lankan participants. I have a small presentation to do. Give me a second. Sorry, some technical problem came.
Some issue in sharing the presentation?
That's right. Yeah, I can see. Give me a second.
Okay, go ahead, Mr.
Disappointing. Yeah, I think some have a technical problem here because sharing the screen going to be.
You go on with the
yeah, until he is ready, can we go for the second presentation?
Yeah, that's better. That's better. That's better. That's better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's move to the second presentation. The presentation is on market trend in Australia for the importation of seafood products and opportunities for Sri Lankan exporters. The presenter is Mr. Mark Boulter, and Executive Officer of Seafood Importers Association of Australia. Mr. Boulter works with companies and organizations to assist in the global trade in safe, sustainable seafood, helping to feed the world and boost the economies of developing nations. He is the Executive Officer of Seafood Importers Association of Australia and the current President of the International Association of Fish Importers. So I now kindly invite Mr. Mark Boulter to do his presentation. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Sri Lankan Consul General for inviting us to give this presentation, and I'll see if I can get away without any technical problems. I hope you can see my screen. So I'm going to cover seafood trading and importing of seafood into Australia. Can I get a nod of somebody that my screen can be seen?
Yes, Mr. Boulter, we can see the screen and we can hear you very well.
Excellent.
Go ahead.
So our trade association represents the importers of seafood into Australia. Our sector represents 65% of the seafood consumed in Australia. So we are a very important part of the sector, of the industry. Roughly 1.9 to $2 billion Australian per annum is the import value of seafood into Australia. And that generates around about $5 billion at the end point of sale within Australia. And it's been estimated that that trade creates 28,000 full-time jobs in Australia in the on-selling of that product here in Australia. I'm going to have a lot of information on my slides. I'll only skip over some of it, but I've said that you can share the slides afterwards if anyone wants to delve into all of the detail. So with regards to the consumption of seafood in Australia, there are 25 million people in Australia, and on average, they consume 15 kilos of seafood per person per year. So there's quite a bit of seafood gets consumed in the country. And like I mentioned before, 65% is imported. And the main imported categories are canned fish and frozen seafood. Of this next graph, you can see that the imported tonnage sits at around about 221,000 tons and is worth roughly $2 million. Domestic tonnage that is sold within Australia for domestic consumption is around about 119,000 tons. And then Australia exports 50,000 tons of seafood to other countries. They predominantly export high-value species, and you can see from the table that the value of those exports is $29 per kilo, but the imports are of a cheaper value, so roughly $9 per kilo for imports into the country. As far as the various sectors that product ends up in, about 82,000 tons goes into canned fish, which is mostly sold at retail. A further 65,000 tons of product is sold at retail, both fresh and frozen. And around about 193,000 tons is sold into food service. Now, the bulk of that food service product is frozen, and that's really where the key opportunity lies in the marketplace, is into that food service space, where the biggest bulk sector is 193,000 tons per year. And that's where we see most imported products sort of being targeted at that area. With regards to the categories of products, I've got a little table here of the top 12 categories of seafood products. Whitefish is the top category, so products like barramundi and bassa fall into that. Things that in Australia we would call fish and chip type fish, you know, a fish that could be fried. Then you get the canned fish, which is mostly tuna with a little bit of salmon, followed by sort of the fresh and frozen salmons at 51,000 tons. Those first two categories, whitefish and canned fish, a lot of that is imported product. Then we see that the salmon, only 9% of that is actually imported. So salmon is a lot less. A lot less product is coming from overseas. Prawns is a very big import category. 63% of prawns consumed in Australia are imported, and in total 50,000 tons of prawns in Australia. So a big category. If we look at the breakdown of some of these against where they come from, this is all of the trade statistics from all of the different countries. And what we can really see here is this 214,000 tons came in 2019 from all around the world. If I go to the next slide, this slide is just the top 4 countries. So what this slide shows us is Thailand and China and Vietnam and New Zealand are the top 4 countries that the product comes in from. And those 4 countries are responsible for 150,000 tons of the imports coming into the country. So at the moment, these 4 nations are really the nations that have sort of tied up the seafood trade into Australia. By contrast, if we look at Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan trade data shows us that 81 tons in total came from Sri Lanka in 2019. And you can almost see each sea container, you can almost see each sea container that's come in. What this shows me is there is massive opportunity. You obviously have seafood products. At the moment, you're not bringing a great deal into Australia. But if I go back to the previous slide, we can see that, from Thailand, China, Vietnam, New Zealand, there's 150,000 tons a year coming into the country. So the potential there, particularly in the frozen category, is really great. If I had to pick some species that I thought would be really good opportunities, any of the whitefish species, and I believe you farm barramundi in Sri Lanka, that would seem a good opportunity to me. And also the swimmer crabs, the blue swimmer crabs. That's another sector that I think would be of interest from Sri Lanka into Australia. Now, these Sri Lankan trade stats might actually be skewed. I'm imagining that there is probably product that goes from Sri Lanka to Thailand that then maybe comes to Australia, but it doesn't show up in the trade statistics because this is only showing product coming directly from Sri Lanka to Australia. But really, to me, it is saying there is big opportunity, and that the Australian marketplace is one that should be considered. Having said all that, getting product into Australia has its hurdles, has its issues. There are a number of different regulatory requirements you have to be aware of to get product into Australia. There are biosecurity rules that are defined in a rules regime called BICON that's operated by the Department of Agriculture. And they set out what can and can't be brought into the country for biosecurity purposes and in what format they are allowed to come in. So for product to come into the country, they have to meet biosecurity first. That's the first tick you need to achieve to get product into the country. Then there is a food safety assessment by IFIP, the Imported Food Inspection Program, which inspects products against the FSAN's Food Standards Code. Then there is also other legislation that needs to be considered, like weights and measures, which includes things like the glaze on frozen fish, which is managed by another government agency called NMI. Then the labeling of product and the naming of product is managed through the ACCC, and we have an Australian standard for fish names, so that becomes a legal requirement. And then on top of those legal government type requirements, there are marketplace requirements with regards to specifications, sustainability, and social welfare. I mentioned social welfare because in Australia, we have a new piece of legislation called the Modern Slavery Act, which came in 2018, is only really being enacted in 2019, so it's a fairly fresh piece of legislation. What this piece of legislation says is that big companies and anybody that big companies buy off, which then tends to mean medium and smaller companies, have to assess their supply chains and make sure that they have appropriate worker welfare obligations all the way down their supply chain. So this is a new piece of legislation, but a piece of legislation that very much industry is now having to be aware of and build it into their product specifications and the like for any new products coming into the country. And we're starting to see, you know, the impacts of that with social welfare audits and things like that being requested on suppliers from overseas to check that everything is being done in an appropriate way. If I look to the future, what can we expect? Well, we can expect more of this, what I call bracket creep, where trade rules just get tweaked and tightened a little bit here and a little bit there. We're seeing more and more food safety standards and sustainability standards get recognized under what's called the GFSI benchmarking process or the GSSI benchmarking process. So there is an obligation or an expectation on businesses that they've got a good standard of certification on their factories, on their processes. But we're at the same time, we're seeing a lot of global competition for seafood. And so sort of we're getting to that point where demand is exceeding supply. And that means, you know, there's a bit of tug of war to try and access product from around the globe, you know, which makes life interesting as well, makes for some interesting challenges. We're seeing more supply chain consolidation. We're seeing more vertical integration of businesses buying other people out in the supply chain above them or below them. Just in the last few weeks, one of Australia's big supermarkets has bought out one of the big food service distribution companies. So we're seeing that happening all around the globe. And through society generally and through non-governmental organizations, we are seeing an increasing call for more transparency around sustainability and more transparency around issues of social welfare. So they are sort of a thing to be aware of. But I mean, my overall sort of impression is at the moment you're bringing in very little to Australia. There's 150,000, 200,000 ton market there. And there's surely going to be some really good market segments that you could slot into. If I go back to this slide though, with all the rules on it, the key thing I would say is with all these different rules, it is very complex. So make sure you partner with good importers who understand these rules, who know these rules and know how to address these rules, because otherwise you can get caught out, you can trip up, and sometimes, you know, if your product gets stopped at the border, that can be a very costly exercise. So when you are trying to bring new products into a new marketplace, make sure that the people you partner with on the other side really know the topic and really know the subject matter, and so that you're going to minimize any chances of having any problems and any hold-ups. So that's it for me. Welcome to share the slides if anyone wants any more information. But also we have a website that I've just shown the web address there, seafoodimporters.com.au. There is loads of information on our website. So if anybody's interested in trade data or consumer perspectives or what the Australian marketplace looks like, you know, go on our website, have a little look, you know, at the various sub pages on the website, and there's lots and lots of information there for you to sort of learn more about the market potential in Australia. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Boulter. That's a very informative presentation made. So I think you have kindly agreed to share your presentation as well. EDB will make arrangements to circulate it to the interested parties from Sri Lanka. And participants can, if they need any clarification, can send your questions to Mr. Boulter now. But we will take those questions at the end of this webinar. So, with that, can I move to Mr. Raheem, are you ready
Yeah,
with the presentation? Okay.
yeah.
So,
Thank you.
since I have already introduced you, I will
Yeah,
give the floor to you, Mr. Raheem.
yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Anama. Once again, good afternoon and good morning to all. So I have small slides to go through how the Sri Lanka's Australia ongoing bilateral trade is going on. I think Mark also touched upon how the Australian market condition for especially for the seafood sector. So generally, the overview of the Australian market is, it has when it comes to imports, it's with minimal restrictions. Australia is a very open market, and Australia's trade policies also continue to be based on the trade openness with the economic growth and improved living standard. And also Australia also pursues a combined multilateral, regional, bilateral, and unilateral approach of trade policy, which is very transparency. And the purchasing power of Australians about 25. I think Mark mentioned in his slides 25 million. So I will go to 25 million populations. It's very high. The purchasing power is very high compared to the countries in the region. And Australia also intakes about 10 million tourists every year visiting Australia. So that also balloon to the purchasing of consumer goods in Australian market. Australia also is dependent on imports of a number of goods. And also Australia is one of the largest producer of agriculture and industrial goods. And also it's also import a number of goods from various countries, especially the apparel products, food items, and healthcare products, automobiles, furniture, rubber-based products, of course, seafood and coconut products, etc. And Australia's top trading partners, 10 trading partners are mostly China, Japan, US, and South Korea, Singapore, New Zealand, United Kingdom, Malaysia, Thailand, and Germany. And Australia also has a free trade agreement with a number of countries. Mostly the ASEAN countries have a free trade agreement with Australia, and US, UK, Canada, China. So that also bring more trading activities between China, the countries which Australia has signed free trade agreements. But Sri Lanka, we don't have a free trade agreement, but we have a trade and investment framework agreement, which was signed in 2017. And we have had 2 series of senior officials meeting in Canberra and Colombo. So that must be the platform for us to plan our strategies, how we can expand our trade and economic relations with Australia. So customs duties is maximum highest customs duties in Australia is 5%, which average duty rate of 4.6%. But most of the goods have zero duty when it import to Australia, especially the food items, electrical and electronic items. And Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka also has Sri Lanka also eligible for a Australian GSP scheme, where a number of products coming into Australia from Sri Lanka also get duty concessions. And then all the imported products are subject to sales tax, that is called GST here. That is 10% of all the products imported, as well as the product produced in Australia. If you think of Sri Lanka's export into Australia, we are happy to see that for the last 3 years, the export has been increased. The last year, 2019 figures, we touched about $200 million US exports coming into Australia. and Australia, Sri Lanka also, we also import number of products from Australia, mostly food item as well, and red lentils are coming. That's one of the largest import from Australia to Sri Lanka. And two-way trade is in 2019 it was like 352 million, and of course the balance of trade was in favor of Sri Lanka. And the Sri Lanka's major export products coming into Australia, the top 10 products, mostly the major portion is ready-made garments. Then comes tea, then rubber-based products and spices, ethnic food items, coconut products, and virgin coconut oil. That's another new products has been expanding in the Australian market from Sri Lanka. We had a series of trade events organized last year and previous year with collaboration with EDB, Department of Commerce, Coconut Development Authority, Sri Lanka Tea Board, to expand our trade and services into the Australian market, especially the IT sector. We had collaborated with the EDB and the ICTA, and we had a delegation coming from Sri Lanka, and we had business networking sessions. We also arranged B2B meetings, and so that's a healthy sign. We had it, but unfortunately 2020 has been not a good year. Sri Lanka's major top 10 products is here. I have highlighted here. What are the products coming? What is the percentage of the of our total exports? And also that mentioning the Australian tariff for the products coming, the top 10 products coming from Sri Lanka, the apparel, rubber products, and most of the other products is zero duty. So there's no custom tariff when these products entering the Australian market. However, that GST 10% is applied to all the products entering the Australian market. So there's no customs duty for major products coming in from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's export under the Australian GSP, if you look at the 2019 figures, $88 million worth of goods have come under the GSP concessions. How the Australia GSP system works, the 5% or more than the 5% for the developing countries, we have a duty concessions. Less than 5% tariff level is a zero duty. However, the least developed countries have more advantage, almost that's duty-free, quota-free access, and they most of the product coming from the least developed countries are zero duty. So that's another challenge for the Sri Lankan products having in the Australian market. For example, the product coming, the ready-made garments coming from Bangladesh is a zero duty. So the same product coming from Sri Lanka, we have to pay 5% duty. Yeah, that is then again the other products also coming from our subcontinent. Also, it's a very similar product, but Sri Lanka also exports. So that's a challenge for us in the Australian market. Yeah, as I mentioned, we had the previous last 3 years, we had a healthy trade relations, and the exports have done very well. But unfortunately, 2020 has become a very challenging year. Everyone, yes, it's not only Australia, Sri Lanka, for entire globe. And but what how Australia worked when the pandemic started, and they didn't impose any additional restrictions for the import of goods at the very beginning. But however, there was some restriction of PPE products importing and exporting from Australia. There are some restriction was imposed, but that is also not anymore now. Then custom procedures, quarantine measures are still in place, and any products coming into Australia has to go through the quarantine process. However, the business is not usual in Australia because Australia also very imposing very strict conditions for the COVID-19 pandemic, because some states in Australia still closed their borders, and the movement of people are very restricted. Trade activities are very limited. Still, the major states like New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland borders are still closed, and domestic tourism and the domestic trade as well, product manufactured from one state to other, so they are also having a difficult time. The new market potential and opportunities for Sri Lanka during pandemic time, what we see in the last month, I think we work with EDB and Ministry of Foreign Relations. We updated all the market conditions here, market trend, and also submitted a number of reports on what other product have the potential here. However, the new opportunities are limited for the new products coming into the market. However, we have to see what are the new options available to use take the tools to expand our trade. Because still, as I mentioned in my previous slide, there's still the restrictions are there, social distance and public gathering, and all the number of restaurants, hospitality industries are still closed. However, what we can see is the ongoing trade is picking up, but the product coming from Sri Lanka is picking up, and we can see it has bounced back. So this slide shows that we say pre-recovery, but Sri Lanka has gained during the pandemic. You can see that the very beginning February figures. It shows that was the normal trend of our exports, monthly exports. However, you can see the very downward trend in April, March, April, May. However, this has picked up, and we can see in July figures, it's also like almost 17 million products have been coming from Sri Lanka. This is the monthly figures for this year. However, we are happy to see that we have a V-shaped recovery. What are the products scope for the further expansion of Sri Lankan products? So I mentioned here these are the products coming from Sri Lanka at the moment. So I am of the view that we have to strengthen our export coming from Sri Lanka and see, because since these products have been established the market here, we can see how we can expand, increase the export quantity. And maybe my other panel members also will share their experience and the expertise and see how we can see the new supply chains or the opportunities available, how to increase our exports of these products. But Australian consumers are very novel and it's Australian market is very sophisticated market, and we have to every time we have to see the more value additions of our existing export product. Even if we take tea, and you can't export the same tea what you're exporting 2-3 years back. So every time the value additions is needed. And if we take the tea, the Sri Lankan tea is the second largest export commodity. But if you take the brand of only the Dilma is the largest export product, the tea brand, and we can see with the other local brand also is available in our Sri Lankan shops, but produced in Sri Lanka, but not to the Australian consumer major supermarket or hypermarket. Consumer product regulation, I think Mark touched upon what are the regulations here, because as he mentioned, the Australian entry restrictions are there because they have their various consumer product regulations because our Australian federal, state and states, federal government and the state government, they imposes many controls over the composition, decision and the labeling of consumer products. And the regulatory authorities often conduct a random inspection, especially when it comes to the food products. They are very strict. And then because any complaint comes, they will do the investigation, and then it will if they find any fault, and it will be end up with some penalties. So Sri Lankan companies who are looking at the Australian market should be aware of what is the regulations of regulations in Australia before they start exporting their products into the Australian market. Yeah, especially the food item, the regulations are very strict. I think Mark also mentioned when it comes to the seafood, if it is not, if they find any information, then they will reject the cargo. And we also have got the notifications from the Australian Quarantine Department on and often with the Sri Lankan consignments. In the last couple of weeks, I get through our High Commission in Canberra, the Quarantine Department, they send the failed food notifications, especially for the food items. So the Sri Lankan companies have to be careful because any products coming has to meet the local standard. Then some of the products, is before it come into the Australian market, need the registration in Australia, especially healthcare products and then Ayurvedic products. Yes, because I remember the Economic Affairs Division of the Foreign Ministry was asking us the potential for Sri Lankan Ayurvedic product. I think we compile a report and send it. Basically, that those kind of product first has to be registered before entering the market. So if they find a sponsor or rather importer, they have to do all the formalities here. They have to register. That registration has to be done by a local company, not a foreign company. So the Australian registered company has to do the registration. So they have to do the registration and do all the certifications before the product coming into the Australian market. So the Sri Lankan company who are looking at the Australian market has to do that formality first before sending any product of healthcare products to the Australian market. The Australian standard, yes, as I mentioned, one of the very strict Australian regulations they have when it comes to the import of goods. But as I mentioned at the very beginning, there's no any restriction, but it has to meet the local requirements. So any products can come into the Australian market because there's no barrier of bringing the product into the Australian market, but it has to meet the local standard. Yeah, challenges, yes, I earlier also I mentioned, and I think Consul General also mentioned what are the challenges we are facing at the moment is because of this pandemic time, because still Australia is lockdown status and movements are restricted. However, we all can put our hands together and see how can we improve our export into the Australian market and see any other opportunities, whether we can pick up any other options to improve our export trend to the Australian market. So with that note, I would leave it at this point, and if there's any Q&A during the Q&A sessions, I'm ready to answer the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Raheem, for a very informative presentation, covering a lot of grounds on market opportunities, market access, rules and regulations. So there are some questions coming in. I think some you have covered, but let's see how we can clarify those at least few questions during the Q&A session. So we can move to the next presenter. That is Mr. Jamitha Pathirana. His presentation topic is product sourcing, supply chain business, channel development and logistics in Australia. So it's a general topic, can be benefited to any of the exporters, not considering the product sector. So just to introduce Mr. Pathirana, Mr. Pathirana has 25 years of experience in brand distribution, product sourcing, channel development and logistics in Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific region. Mr. Jam has developed new channels for over 100 global brands, including Lego, Bosch, Swarovski, SK2, Gillette, and Philips in retail, e-commerce, and B2B sectors in the region. So with that introduction, I hand over the floor to Mr. Jamitha Pathirana to do his presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Thank you, Ms. Anoma. Thanks for the introduction. And first of all, I want to say thank you to Sri Lankan Export Development Board and Consul General of Sri Lanka in Sydney, especially to Mr. Raheem, personally inviting me to attend this event. And I'm really excited to be part of this discussion. Hopefully I can add value to the discussion. So first of all, I wanted to quickly go through a quick presentation. So want to, yeah, just give me 1 second. Can you see my presentation?
Not yet, yeah. Not yet, John.
Hopefully.
Don't blame the Australian technology.
No, no, no. Come on. Stop sharing.
Yeah.
Can you see?
Yeah,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, excellent. So, sorry, I thought I'm gonna have the same issue with Mr. Raheem. So, all right, I'm not gonna go through a lot of discussion slides because some of the stuff that I already covered. So I wanna go straight to the my view of dynamics of the Australian market and current challenges and opportunities for Sri Lankan exporters. So as a few of the panelists mentioned before, Australia is a very competitive and very complex market. The Australian retail market is dominated by a few established retailers with a push to sell their private label brands. E-commerce purchases are now well over 10% of all consumer spending, well over $30 billion and growing. As you know, with the COVID, that sector is significantly growing last few months. And then the consumer appetite, I'm talking very generally in terms of products coming to Australia. For quality, health, organic and environmental friendly products are quite high. That's the consumer appetite. After 3 decades of continuous growth, as you all know, we are in a recession right now, and economic, according to last night's budget, economic recovery, they expected to grow in 4.75% in 2021 and 22 financial year, which is a good news. Another trend, what's happening right now in Australia, as you're probably aware, there's a trade war with China. Right now, 90% of our merchandising actually imported from China. So, however, there's a current business sentiment is moving away from Chinese imports. So this also, I see a huge opportunity for other export markets, product like homeware, hardware to look at, possibly Sri Lankan exporters to think. And then another thing coming up in the marketplace, we are forecasting a food shortage. The last few months due to COVID, the farming actually reduced by 50%. So that's going to impact in the next 6 to 12 months. So that will, and also we are expecting extreme weathers. Last year we had bushfires. This time we are expecting flooding. So that's also going to impact Australian agriculture. So we are expecting a shortage in Australia. So that could also potentially, we may require to bring foods from overseas. And then the overall exporting can be a very complex process, as Mark and Mr. Raheem mentioned earlier. There's a lot of certification, regulations, etc. And they keep adding. It's a very highly regulated market, and barrier to enter into this market is quite complex. Creating a long-term and sustainable partnerships is extremely difficult without on-the-ground support for Sri Lankan exporters. So this is something that need to be highlighted here. So having a local partner supporting to develop that partnership is very, very important for any Sri Lankan exporters. So next slide, I'm going to quickly, what I'm going to talk about, a little bit about my business and how we can actually help Sri Lankan exporters. So very much related to the topic that I was given. So pretty much our business, I'm going to go very, very super fast because this slide can be available to you through the EDB. So Bdynamic, my business started in 2005 as a promotional product company, sourcing promotional merchandising, especially from overseas China. And now we grew into 4 different business verticals, to e-business and supply chain and logistics and brand distribution. So quickly talk about those 4 different verticals. So we are doing product launches, gift with purchase for medium to large corporations in Australia. As I mentioned, we are sourcing these products in mainly 99% from China. So as mentioned earlier, there's a significant move to move away from China. So this could be opportunity to look at Sri Lanka. And then the second opportunity, we are also working with the major retailers in Australia, including Qantas Frequent Flyer Program, Velocity, and all the loyalty and major reward programs. And we've been developing, designing, developing, and distributing products into these loyalty and major programs for last 12 years. Brands like Lego to Swarovski to Royal Dalton, Waterford, Wedgwood. We are under more than 100 brands under our management. And so this is another avenue for Sri Lankan exporters to get in to e-commerce retail business. And then we are also a full service logistic facility. I'm actually sitting in the middle of the warehouse in our Sydney, where our head office is. So we are providing from customer clearance to warehousing, B2B fulfillment, drop shipping, cross-docking, transportation, inventory management, reverse logistics, value-added services. As I mentioned, it's a full service logistic supply chain business. So any product coming into this market, we can look after providing that logistic solution. And again, technology, we have we are promoting us as a technology-driven logistic company. So we have a warehouse management system, sophisticated warehouse management system. Any product come through any, we are integrated to major e-commerce platforms. Any products coming through, we can seamlessly process within 2 hours and send it to our customers. So our facility in Sydney, we have 200,000 square feet facility with 6-star Green Star rated. So this facility actually run on solar, one of the first in Australia. So we are servicing customers like Costco to Sanitarium, New South Wales Government, Cricket Bankisa, and a few large corporations in our facility, and we are delivering nationally as well. And then the fourth part of our business is the brand distribution. So we are focusing on 3 areas. B2B distribution. We currently have over 3,000 customers. Like we signed up with Cricket Australia last week. So we distribute to over 2,500 cricket clubs in Australia. We're distributing Dettol, brands, major consumer brands. And we work with hotels, schools, cinemas, restaurants, clubs, etc. So we have that capability to get into B2B distribution. And also we do retail distribution. And we have access to major retailers like Woolworths, Coles, Costco, Aldi. We have that relationship that we can look at your brand or private label product to go into those markets. And then the third one, which is the fastest growing area, which is the e-commerce. So we're working very closely our own platform to eBay, Amazon, and we're working with other e-commerce service platforms like Google, etc. So that's pretty much to our business. So as you can see, we are like a one-stop shop for logistic, distribution, fulfillment, brand sourcing. So I've been doing this for the last 15 years, developed this business. And so just realizing, helping a lot of big business, global business, and how can we actually help Sri Lankan exporters to come to this market. So my question, so I was thinking, can I look at Sri Lankan product? I thought, what's the best way to actually help them? I came up with these 6 steps. Can I actually look at these products and see whether this product's going to fit into this market? Can I identify the right market fit for this product and come up with a go-to-market strategy? And then can we really evaluate these market options and present 2 available option and then provide the customization, market readiness, certification, etc., to bring that product into this market? And commercialization, connecting to the channels, logistic, supply chain, warehousing, etc. Let me provide that service. And then finally, not just providing those services and also continuous to helping that brand to grow and manage a sustainable relationship with this market. So with that in my mind, we created Bconnect. So this is where we thought was the missing thing. We don't have a connection in Sri Lanka. So early this year, we established an office in Colombo. So any Sri Lankan business interested in to come into this market, we can provide, go through that 6 steps that I mentioned earlier. We can help facilitate that export process. So our office is in 216 Havelock Road, Colombo, and we are not looking after Australia market. We also have access to 11 other market, Pacific Island market. In the next 3 years, we also planning to expand into a few other countries. So hopefully we could help Sri Lankan business to bring your products into this market. To finally, what I wanted to give you a quick advice to Sri Lankan exporters. So when you're really looking for a product, trying to create a point of difference, uniqueness in your product offering, Sri Lankan needs to, sorry, Mr. Raheem, I'm gonna go a little bit, you had a few categories, but I wanted to say to Sri Lankans, think a little bit outside the box. Tea, spices are very mature and saturated market in Australia. So we have to come up with something unique. Can we create something, new opportunities? So as a Sri Lankan, let's look at something unique. And investing in your brand is also a very key, important recommendation that I would suggest you to consider. And also developing a long-term sustainable business in Australia. I mean, Dilma is a great example. They've been doing business for the last 30 years. If you listen to this series, very first one Dilhan Fernando's, Mr. Dilhan Fernando's discussion, and he was talking about why it's important to create a brand instead of sending a product. So I would recommend you to consider that, investing in your brand. If you're thinking of making a lot of money quickly, maybe this is not the market for you. But if you're thinking of developing a brand, a long-term sustainable business, as the Aussie says, this is your chance to put your money where your mouth is. So thank you again for the opportunity to participate. And if you have any questions, more than happy to answer.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Pathirana. A very practical approach to enter into the Australian market. Let's see how many questions are there for you to answer during the Q&A session. So we can move to the final presentation or the speech on ICT BPO sector. So the presenter is Mr. Imran Furkan, CEO, Tresync Australia and IT BPO expertise. Just to introduce Mr. Furkan, prior to moving to Australia, Mr. Imran was the Executive Director of SLASCOM, the IT BPO trade chamber in Sri Lanka, and served on the IT BPO advisory board of EDB. He has 20 years of work experience and 10 years in senior management in IT BPO, finance, commodities, media, and professional services, among other industries. Mr. Imran is based in Australia, Singapore, and Sri Lanka. So with that introduction, I give floor to Mr. Imran to do his to make his speech.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Anoma, and I'd like to thank the Consulate in Sydney, with whom I have worked for the last few years, particularly Mr. Raheem, and also the Consulate in Melbourne, Consul General Fonseca and Consul Diana, and before that, Mr. Prasanna, who was a Consul General, we did a lot of work with him, and he's now the ambassador to Vietnam, and we're working with him as well. So thank you, and DDB, I have fond memories of serving in the IT BPO advisory committee, and also the market development committee as well. So this industry is very unique because unlike the other industry that we spoke of, where you're physically exporting something, here the expertise can lie in Sri Lanka, and you can actually export the services. And therefore, it's a renewable resource in many ways, and therefore an industry that needs to be really, promoted, simply because, you don't have much of a brain drain. And also there's possibility, which I am seeing now, of a brain gain, where the opportunities in Sri Lanka for some of the senior IT BPM industry specialists are so good, financial-wise, that they're willing to move back from the developed world in the US. Particularly, I see that happening in the UK, and obviously Australia and New Zealand also. But I think that's a beautiful trend that's happening as well. I'm not going to give you like a lot of statistics about the IT BPM market in Australia, simply because it may be relevant. Some segments to the Sri Lankan exporter, right? Just a market size of about 94 billion Australian dollars, which has been growing at about 4% every year, which is pretty good. But this year there's supposed to be a decline of about 8% because of COVID, but that's not bad. And I think that the market will recover. To give you an overview of what we offer from Sri Lanka first, I see a lot of questions already on the side panel about how to enter the market. And also in terms of the what I see as the future post-COVID, right? So a few things. So our companies offer the interaction between Australian and Sri Lankan IT BPM industry works on a couple of ways, right? The first one is there are captive centers. There are big Australian companies who come and set up either software development centers or services, or the centers that provide them services like design or accounting or even legal services, right? And even a little bit of voice, not much voice from Sri Lanka, okay? So they go to Philippines or India for that. And honestly, I don't know whether we won't even play in that space, because the margins are not really great in that space, right? So we have the captive markets, and actually the potential for that is also huge in some ways, because I mean, I've had so many companies who wanted to set up a development center in Sri Lanka, but they couldn't find the right size of talents. They, for example, they needed, this is a few years ago, right, 200 developers in a particular technology, and they may not be able to, provide that in one go without disrupting the existing.
Imran?
Hello. You all also cannot hear Mr.
No.
Imran?
No.
Hi, you're back. Imran?
So technology.
Yeah. You got disconnected for a while.
Yeah. So actually, what I was saying at that moment is there's a new method of entry, into the country by some exporters or people who are interested in investing in the industry. That is to purchase existing companies, keep the management, and go on. And that's a massive opportunity, which I don't see a lot of our players taking up. They're very scared of letting go of control, but they don't have the scale, to take on big projects as well. And I think that's something that we need to look at. There are many offers of where specific, say, wealth management companies or specific existing Australian companies wanted a whole turnkey solution developed in Sri Lanka by our existing IT BPM companies, right? We are talking something in the range of $20-30 million in one go, right? So they wanted them to develop a solution, operate the solution, and then transfer the solution back to the Australian company, in a couple of years from now. And I think that is an opportunity that has, of course, not been seized as well. We continue to offer basic services. So we have, the basic website development services that we provide. You have an Australian partner who will front end it, take the contract, contract it back to Sri Lanka, and we do those websites. Pretty straightforward, plain vanilla stuff, not much of a margin. And not much scope for development. We also have other services that are being provided. For example, there are digital marketers. Again, the Australian company would front end and take the contract and then subcontract it back to Sri Lanka as well. In terms of the IT solutions, there are a few people who have made some really interesting forays into the Australian market. I know a couple of companies that have gone and worked with Australian Airlines. Of course, now they are in a little bit of trouble, but they developed a crew management system for their airline. So the chances of getting a massive contract at this stage, due to the size of our own industry, is not huge. But we have opportunities to go and play niche segments of those markets. I think that is what will grow in the future as well. Coming to BPM or BPO services, now this is a lot more established than before, right? We did start off with voice, when we were competitive in terms of pricing, and also when the market is not mature. But I think we have been very smart enough to get out of that area, and we're focusing on areas like financial and accounting. I know quite a few Sri Lankan players at least got a few more seats from their Australian partners due to COVID, right? Because of the shutdowns and stuff like that, they felt very comfortable, sending it back to Sri Lanka and getting some of the work done. There's a growing demand for legal services, particularly around conveyancing, which is an area that legal BPO is a little bit more margin favorable, than voice or even accounting. And another very highly growth heavy segment is health related services, right? There's a player who is doing the documentation of health services, particularly for GPs and so on, and they are growing exponentially from 0 to 700 positions, in a matter of a year or two. And I was talking to them because there is an interest in taking BPM or out of Colombo. There's an interest from the government to take it to places like Hambantota. For technology, for software, it may not be possible, but this gentleman is very interested. in setting up a center there. And as you can see with the world aging, right, and with COVID-related opportunities, you're going to see a massive digitization of healthcare. And I think that is a massive opportunity that we need to tap from a Sri Lankan perspective. We're doing it very well. We have the capacity to do it. But I think the key point is getting those initial contracts, because those contracts are very difficult to get, because there is a high level of compliance that goes into health documentation, right? I'm very happy to see ICTA coming up with the Data Protection Act, which is going to give a lot of comfort to players to come in Sri Lanka, because they know that the data that is being transferred from Australia and Sri Lanka will meet standards, very high standards, right? I've looked at the draft of the Data Protection Act. I was working with Jamitha from ICT on this, and the initial draft is even higher than GDPR, right? The very high European standard that we are looking at. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity in health-related, software, and also BPO as well. And the other opportunity is in open banking, right? Australia was supposed to get into open banking this year, and we are moving towards partial rollout this year and next. What open banking, to make it very simple, is where the consumer gets control of their data. Right now, the consumer's data is with the bank or financial services provider or the telecom company, and they don't allow you to take your data and shop around. What open banking, particularly in terms of banking, will do is give the consumer the opportunity to take that data and shop around different banks or financial institutions or telecom companies or anything, and negotiate for themselves, the ability to kind of, empower themselves. And I know already a big open source player has gone to Sydney and setting up, because they are anticipating that the Australian banking and other sectors will want these our solutions, right? At the moment, they are all American-based or even a little bit of European-based solutions. They're very comfortable with American technology. But I think that is changing now, particularly in terms of costing, and also the fact that there are some other issues around Australia and the US in terms of technology companies, which will come to the fore in the coming years. Third part that I want to talk about before getting to the questions is, how do you establish a beachhead, right? In the past, from 2011, ICTA and then EDB sent delegations to the Gartner and Expo and so many other exhibitions in Australia. And actually, every company that went had one or two, inquiries, joint venture opportunities, and so on. Obviously, this year it's virtual, and I don't know how effective that's going to be, but I knew that in the past they were very effective in terms of getting opportunities. Another opportunity is to actually look at a contact. So there's a lot of opportunity. What a lot of successful companies have done is they've gone through a Sri Lankan expatriate, right, and tapped them and kind of got an introduction into the company, and that expatriate has taken it and introduced them to the chief information officer, or in terms of the BPO, either the chief operating officer and so on, and they've come down, have a look at our processes and systems, been very impressed, and then you've got more contracts as well. Again, that is still possible. It's just that it's very difficult, because obviously not all expatriates want to kind of get involved there, because there could be a conflict of interest as well. And then there are commercial partners, right? There are a couple of types of commercial partners who will help you get in. There are sales teams that will front end it for you. So they will be your sales team in Australia. They will go ahead and then kind of sell your products and services. Obviously, there is a very steep cost to that, including a fixed component and a commission-based component as well. Then there are platforms where you can go and get a marketing guy for a day or a few hours, and they can go and do it for you. That's a little less expensive, but effectiveness-wise is a problem as well. And I think the third aspect is that there are also dedicated call centers that they can front you in Australia, and you can do it as well. But I think the most successful route has been through introductions, and that's the route to take forward as well. One more thing before I end. I know I can see Mr. Raheem tell me about the time. Look, post-COVID, there are large numbers of Australian SMEs who are very bad in terms of digitization, right? The process of helping them get to digitization is the next biggest opportunity for anybody in Australia. And I think we can make a play in that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Imran. So we came to the end of the technical session. All the presentations are over. Now we can move on to the Q&A. Now we are already past our scheduled time, so I will try to have one or two questions from Mr. Jamitha. A lot of companies are asking, I think you also can see your contact details. Can we share it, or how we can manage it?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Anoma. I already sent my details to those people requested. And I'm happy to share this presentation with ADB. So you, anyone interested, you can share, please.
All right. Okay. We will arrange to circulate the presentations. And then I would like to move to Mr. Raheem, our Consul Commercial in Australia. One is, could you please elaborate on the bilateral agreements between two countries? As I understand, that is Sri Lanka still attract duty. I think you have mentioned a few things. You can have any more elaborations on it?
Okay. Yeah, no, but as I mentioned, Australia, number of products coming from Sri Lanka to Australia market qualify under the Australian GSP scheme. Most of the products is zero duty at the moment, except garments and the rubber products. So these are the 5% duty, but still we get the duty concession under the GSP. So other products are tariff levels are zero duty. This is under the Australian GSP scheme. So what I mentioned is, Ms. Anoma, you are the part of the delegation of the TIFA talks. What we talk also at that time, how we can get more access to our products. You remember the Canberra meeting. So yeah. We didn't go for a duty-free access because for the free trade agreement negotiation, or we didn't throw that idea because Australia also will ask for duty-free concession for a number of products. So, but based on since our the tariff levels are lower for the Sri Lankan products, so what we were talking to the Australian is how we can expand the economic and the trade collaborations. So that's a TIFA platform where we agreed upon, and we can develop more of a trade and economic interactions based on that platform rather than going for a duty-free concession. And Sri Lanka also have the other two agreements, investment promotion agreements. We have it with Australia, and also avoidance of double taxation agreements also exist between the two countries. So these are the commercial agreements at the moment. And what I just want to add, what Imran also stopped there, now how we can, for the IT sector, how we can interact more interaction, because the IT sector is more coming, is a new sector that we can expand more interaction. We did some business matchmaking in the last year, and we had 2 delegations came from ICTA and EDB. And we also participated the CBIT exhibition, Imran, last year.
Yes.
And
yes.
we did the business business networking. Of course, thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs under the Economic Diplomacy Initiative, they funded the program. And we do, as you correctly mentioned, yes, I agree your point, because the contact points are very important. It's not necessarily to be the Australian companies or Australian counterpart. We can explore the Sri Lankan expat community here as well. So we also, but that will be the channel. You know, we can see we can explore the contacts and reach out the right parties. So that has to be tapped again. But unfortunately, this year has been a bad year, and most probably post-COVID, we should be able to continue on that. Thank you.
Right. And Mr. Raheem, there's a very direct question from Ms. Sunali Jayasuriya, how we can find out the customers for solid tires. Please provide us the list of importers who are importing solid tires to Australia.
Yeah, we will. I can compile a list of importers, and maybe I will pass on to you, EDB. Maybe you can distribute them. But however, just to give you a general idea about the information available here is very difficult. It's not that, it's not openly available for consumer the data, because Australia is they are very protecting the data of the consumer data. So, but even working with the chambers here is on a commercial term. You know, we talk about this at the TIFA also. So this is what is happening here, because no data are available freely, and if we are even we work with the Australian chambers, even that has to be on a payment basis. Even they arrange their B2B meetings, and that we have to pay for hourly basis or daily basis, whatever. So, but we do in our own. We compile a database. So maybe I will compile a report, the data on importers of tires. I will pass on to you. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Next question is for Mr. Boulter. Mr. Jayantha Senadira is asking whether with COVID-19 pandemic, are there any restrictions or non-tariff barriers that we have to face while exporting to Australia? Mr. Boulter, any comments on that? Additional things he is asking whether.
I don't really think you are much in the way of additional things, no. There haven't really been any additional issues to deal with. In the first few months of COVID, there were some issues where the government inspectors couldn't get out to warehouses to inspect incoming goods. So there were some delays there maybe for a little while until they worked out their processes. But that's all behind us now, and no, so everything is running quite smoothly. And the only COVID related problems in terms of distribution that have been recently have been to do with Sydney Port and to do with some issues at Sydney Port that were more to do with workers that were threatening to go on strike. And part of that was about the amount of cargo they were having to handle. There were apparently 30,000 empty sea containers sitting in Sydney Port that are kind of blocking things and getting in the way, because those containers would have normally been filled with product and sent back overseas. But the exports have been happening at a slower rate than normal from Australia. So there's all these empty containers, sea containers, causing problems. So some practical issues like that have been floating around in recent weeks, but no actually sort of regulations as such. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. And there are similar questions on individual products. I think we can discuss with Mr. Raheem and get some answers offline due to the time availability. Now, for Mr. Imran, I think you have covered these things, but one thing I would like to ask is, we build, Mr. Kalinga Gunodhan is asking, we build mobile games and online reputation management solutions for companies. Is there any way that we can partner up with an Australian company?
Yeah, I think, thank you for your question, Mr. Kalinga. I think you can, but the process of introduction is where, again, it's very difficult, because there are multiple solutions being provided by a lot of people around the world, right? So for Australian company to partner with you, they need an introduction for somebody that they trust very much to make that. So one thing that I recommend to people is you can contact me, and I'm happy to do a few introductions. I mean, completely free of charge. Just a service I do for people who contact me. But in addition to that, what you can also do is you can do a little bit of mapping on LinkedIn, right? You take some bit of time where you can map the relationships of various people, because they put their designation. That, so, for example, if you want a mobile gaming partner, what you can do is you can map some of the mobile dating company, gaming companies in Australia, and then you can map the some of the people who hold important positions, see what relationships they have, and then you can find one of those people in that chain that can do the introduction for you, right? You might have the best technology in the world, but unless the person that you're being introduced to trusts you, they're not going to give you a time of day. That's a problem with services, right? As to a product where you can touch it, you can feel it, you can send a sample, you can have world-class certifications, With the service, it's the field. So I think that is something you can do. I advise people, it takes a bit of time, map whatever you can publicly available data on LinkedIn, find relationships, find your point of entry, go through that. And obviously, the consulate and EDP and all that will help. But the key point also another point of call is ICTA. They have a lot of contacts as well. You can go to them as well. So do the initial round of EDB, ICTA, the consulate in Sydney, Melbourne, so on. And once you have done that, but also parallelly do the mapping. Yes, thank you.
Sorry about that. There were some interruptions from my computer. I will go for the last question due to the time restriction. That is for Mr. Raheem. What are the requirements need to be fulfilled in bring samples of apparel, food, etc. to Australia? Is there a registration process in Consulate General and Australian officers? What are the costs of registration of such businesses in Australia? This will be the last question. Mr. Raheem.
The question is not clear. Is it to bring the sample here to Australia?
Yes. What are the requirements need to be fulfilled to bring samples of apparel, food, etc. to Australia? Is there any procedure for samples?
Yeah, for the apparels, there's no any restrictions. You can bring any samples to Australia. But if it is a food items, some food item, it depends on what is the food item they're bringing in, because the plant-based products or meat products, milk products, even Ayurvedic products. It has some preconditions. You can't just bring the products. That if you want to bring that samples, then you need to follow the regulations. So if the question, the person asking the question, if you can email to me what are the details, then I can share the information.
On food as well, on food, up until about a year ago, anything less than 10 kilos in one consignment could be designated as sort of personal use. And so a lot of trade samples used to come in under that less than 10 kilo rule, but they've now changed that to 1 kilo. So 1 kilo often is not enough of a trade sample for a food item, so it's made it more difficult. So things now are having to come in as a properly imported goods rather than as a personal items, personal goods. I know one of the companies that I work with, we now actually have sort of trade samples permits that allow us to bring in particular products up to 10 kilos on a food trade samples, so long as that product that comes in does not leave the company once it gets there and it's destroyed after it's been assessed. So there are special sort of rules that have been put in place around trade samples for things like biosecurity and food safety for food items.
Thank you. With that, we will end the Q&A session as well. But there are a lot of questions coming in, a lot of interest from the private sector. So, Mr. Raheem, can we share your and all the presentations with the contact details? The companies are asking for contact details of the resource persons for them to contact you all for further information and clarification. I would be thankful if Mr. Raheem, you can coordinate it and send us the presentation with their contact details so that we can circulate to all. So it is time to say thank you to all the resource persons for very informative and very interesting session. And special thanks to our Consul General in Sydney, Mr. Lakshman Hulugalle, and also Mr. Abdul Raheem for coordinating this at the Australian side. So I would like to give a floor to our Consul General and Mr. Raheem to say a few words before we end our session.
CG.
Yes, thank you very much. It was a very fruitful session we had it, and it was useful for Sri Lankans who are interested in investing and coming into or business to do business in Australia. I thank all the participants, panelists, and especially the EDB for organizing this. Thank you very much. Rahim, over to you.
Yeah, well, once again, I would like to thank all the panel members accepting our invitations, Mark, Jam, and Imran, sparing their time and joining our webinar today. And special thanks to EDB and official Ms. Anoma and Ms. Apsara, who has been coordinating with me and organizing this webinar. Hope it is useful for our Sri Lankan companies, and we look forward to working with you all in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.